and I was working with a headhunter who worked with junior military officers as a way of um, introducing us to Fortune 500 companies. And I went through the training that this organization offered. And it was amazing what I learned from them. Interestingly enough, this guy, he made money by sending viable candidates to corporations. And I got good at being interviewed. I was a theater major in college, so if you could give me a script and say, go out and do it, that worked for me. So I kept getting sent around the country to different corporations to interview. And I was often offered positions that I turned down. But the guy that I was with said, that's great, just keep going because I want these companies to know I can send them a viable person. Well, that was great because boy, I was picking up a lot of information about how interviews worked. So after that, I eventually went to work for Pfizer Incorporated as a pharmaceutical sales rep. And I went out and talked to doctors every day about medicine. And a sales call is very much like an interview. So I learned a little bit more about it then. The next thing that happened is I got promoted a couple of times. We're skipping ahead. I became a district manager for Pfizer. And I went through Pfizer's training on how to be an interviewer. Meanwhile, I started doing interviews for my alma mater, Middlebury College. And I went through Middlebury's training on how to do interviews. And eventually I got out of pharmaceutical sales and became a teacher. I went back to grad school. I interviewed for grad schools using these same techniques. Developed a little further now. I was a little older and a little wiser. And when I became a teacher at Andover, and I spent 20 years at Andover as a public speaking teacher, theater teacher, English teacher, history, ran a dormitory, coached a wrestling team, the whole high school, prep school routine. But as a part of my public speaking classes, I started seeing kids. Now, one of my additional duties at Andover was working for the admissions office. And I would do 3 interviews every week for 20 years, well, from September to January, till the interview season shut down. But I went through Andover's training on how to do interviews as well. And it's like, oh my gosh, look at the pattern. All of these different companies, corporations, colleges, high schools, and I even did a little interviewing when I was in the Army as an Army officer selecting soldiers for special projects. And it's all the same. And there is a system that interviewers are using, even though most of them don't know they're doing it. And we'll go over that as we get into this meeting today. So I started teaching my kids in my public speaking classes who were getting ready to go off for their college interviews. I'd say, hey, look, are you ready to go? Do you know what it is you need to communicate when you get down there? And they would all look at me with the sort of same, blank stare and say, Mark, I don't know what they're going to ask. So how can I prepare? And I started going, oh no, guys, look, what they're going to ask is not important. If you worry about the questions, you won't think about the answers. And that's what you need to do. You need to think about, who am I? And who is this college? And how do we match? And so that's what I started doing. I started helping kids develop a system, first of all, to inventory their own achievements, and also to look at the colleges and how they advertise who they are, and be able to start demonstrating that match. And so what we're going to talk about today is going to be a really quick, just overview of what this process is all about. I'm going to give you the best tips I can give you, and I hope they will be helpful to you. But what I'm really going to tell you is that you need to develop it more. You need to invest a certain amount of time in creating your content and learning how to communicate it to the institutions that you think are the right ones for you. So that's where this all comes from. I spent, the next 10, 15 years of my life at Andover teaching kids how to do that. The college counseling office there started enlisting me to do this with the entire junior class, and pretty soon it became a business. So now I am the president of the Interview Skill Coaching Academy, and I sit here in my home in the woods, and I teach people how to do interviews, whether it's for schools, colleges, or professional interviews for jobs, because the interview is the interview. So once you learn how to do this, it will help you jump forward for the rest of your life. Let's face it, Interviews are the gateway to opportunity. So if you can get good at doing interviews, you will have more and more options that are the ones you want in your life. Okay, so enough of an introduction. Where do you want to go from here, Janice?
Well, that was great. And I think you'll see as we progress how important Mark's background is to everything that he's going to share with you. So we've got a lot of information to cover. Let's get started. The first question that I wanted to tackle was, maybe you can just give us an overview of why the college interview has become more important during this application season, and probably will be as we move forward over the next couple of years based on what we've seen. So perhaps you can talk to that a little bit.
Okay, I'm delighted to do so. Before I do, let me ask those of you who are comfortable turning on your camera. I've got the little gallery view so I can see you, and I love to see the faces of the people I'm talking to so I can tell if I say something and you're like, then I can explain it a little better. If you're all like nodding and you got it going on, that's fine. We can move along more quickly because there's going to be a lot of information to cover. So if you're comfortable turning on your camera, thank you, Chip. I appreciate that. Please let me see your faces, okay? And if you got a question, you know, you can wave. We can interrupt as we go. Fantastic. Thank you very much. All right. I appreciate it, folks. So, Janice, the question again is, how have interviews changed recently, right?
And how have they become more important during this application season?
Okay, so this is critical, folks. As you all know, what's happened with the college interviews over the last, let's just back up a little bit, the last 10, 15 years, more and more schools weren't doing interviews. Or if they did do interviews, they were doing it with alumni. And some people thought, okay, well, those aren't really very important. You probably also noticed that a lot of colleges started to say it's interview optional, right? We even have test optional. It's getting to the point where everything is optional. Okay, so what's going on right now? 2020. Colleges all know that last spring, we can't really look at those grades the same way. Everybody went online. Everybody's internet access was a little different, right? Every teacher's ability to teach on the internet, and kids, I know you can definitely tell me. You got some faculty members who get online and they start doing an entire lecture like this. Okay, today, kids, we're going to study the American Revolution. We're going to start in the year 1770. And you're like, oh my God, how can I? And then somebody else is excellent and you get all kinds of information. It's a whole new bag of tricks. So schools were less capable of delivering a quality education, and kids had an uneven ability to, you know, figure it out. So the colleges are saying, okay, well, how do we deal with that? What's the best drill? And they said, I guess we have to kind of look at those grades a little differently than we used to last spring. Well, guess what? Also this fall, right? This fall, it's even more different because some schools figured out a good way to do online education. Some schools are open and having in-person education. Some schools are closed and they don't know how to do it, right? So colleges know they can't hold that against the applicants. So grades from junior spring and senior fall are discounted in importance. Now, let's say the same story on the SAT. You know, the SAT and the ACT are now optional at a heck of a lot of colleges that they used to be required. And if your scores are down a little bit, even for the ones who require it, they say, yeah, but look at all this stuff from the freshman year and sophomore year. So if the data points that are easy for computers to assess, right? Colleges for quite a last couple of years have really been looking at the computer data points. Boom, 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 spit it out. Get rid of those kids, take these kids. They can't do that anymore. They've got to be much, much more personal. They got to do their job. Thank God. This is exactly what colleges should have been doing all along. That whole admissions scandal that happened a year or two ago, If the colleges were really getting to know who the kids were, that stuff with somebody's face pasted onto the water polo player in the pool, that would never have happened. So colleges this year are looking for you to tell your personal story. Who the heck are you? And how can you prove it? So as a result, many more are doing interviews that didn't used to. Some of them still don't have the time because with the Common Application, kids can apply to a whole lot of colleges just by pushing the button, right? You fill out your 5, 6 essays, a couple more supplementals, and boom, 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 just cover the bases. Now, colleges like that because that means their percentage of applications the number of applications is going up and the number of acceptances is staying the same. So their percentage of those that we accepted, right, that's going down. And that makes them look good on the US News and World Report. So anyhow, what it all boils down to is they still got to make decisions. And they got to make decisions based upon the stories that you tell. So what are your abilities to do that? The interview, if you can get one, and the essays. But there's also every phone call that you can make to the college admissions office. Every opportunity that you have to have a Zoom conference with somebody as a formal interview or as an informal conversation. You ask a question or you send an email and they say, well, tell you what, let's just set up a Zoom time. And there's a lot more of that going on this year than there ever was before. So it may not be a formal interview, but it's an opportunity to have a conversation with an admissions officer. And you can bet that that relationship that starts to happen can advantage you over someone who doesn't do that. So we're going to talk today about the official interview, but the best way to prepare yourself for these unofficial interviews is the same. So you want to think of it as, I'm going to be able to have an opportunity to communicate with the admissions department. And I want to have all of my content ready to go. I want to know who I am and I want to know why I matched this college. And every opportunity I get to tell any piece of that story, take advantage, because other kids won't. And that's how you compete and win. Did I answer that question, Janice?
Yeah. And then just to add to that, I would just add or ask you, do you know or do you think on average that there are more schools that are offering what we would call the more formal interview, not what you're also talking about informal, but or reaching out to by different means. But would you say that more schools are offering the interview than in the past because of all the things that you're referring to?
Yes. I mean, the answer is definitely yes. More are doing it. How many more? And is it my specific school? Hard to say.
Right.
What is absolutely clear is that this is a moving target. Mm-hmm. For years and years, you could call up any college. You could say, okay, what's the application process? And they're going to send you a thing, or you can just look online and it says, boom, 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 boom. We do interviews. No, we don't. Or whatever it says. We do alumni interviews. Get on the list. Whatever it says this year, pay no attention. I mean, yes, do those things. But if they say they don't do this, I'm willing to bet next week they might. Their colleges are all dealing with something brand new they have never dealt with before, and they are learning as they go. Okay? So the other thing that's absolutely clear, more are doing interviews. What's also absolutely clear is that there are more opportunities to do what they call information sessions or interviews. A girl that I'm working with right now is interested in Bryn Mawr, a small women's liberal arts college, right? And she wants to know if she should apply early decision. So they said, okay, well, this year, because you can't do tours of campus, we're going to have information sessions. So they scheduled officially. Now, she hadn't submitted an application or anything. She's just a random student at this point. So the college scheduled to do one admissions officer is going to do a Zoom call with 4 kids. Okay, so already we're talking about a pretty specific deal, right? But it's purely informational. So the admissions officer comes on and the first thing she says is, "Oh, hi kids, this is great. Everybody please introduce yourself. And if you have a question that you want to make sure I address in this session today, please ask it." So everybody gives their, my name is blah, 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 and I live at blah, 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 and I go to such a school and I'm 17 years old. And my question is blah, 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 blah. And then she says, "Okay, that's great. I'll get to that in the presentation." Well, my girl's question was not addressed in the presentation. So, I mean, it's a standard 20-minute, this is what we do at our college. It's kind of like a mini tour of the thing and some of the philosophy and all the rest of that. It's great. They get to the end of it and she says, "Now, did any of you have an opportunity to hear the answer to your question?" And the other 3 kids said, nothing. And my girl said, "Well, no, you didn't address my question. My question was about how diversity is being used at both the admissions office and how it is affecting what happens in the curriculum."
Mhm.
And she said, "Oh, well, we really don't have time to get into that today. Why don't you send me an email?" And so she did. She sent the email. And then guess what happens? This admissions officer wrote her back and said, "You know what? That's a complicated question. And I think it would be great for you and me to have a Zoom conference one-on-one and we can talk about it." What's that? Is that a formal interview? Or is that an informal interview? Or does it make any difference? No, she has a chance to tell her personal story and her interests and her questions to an admissions officer. So there is a heck of a lot more of that happening. You guys, whenever you get a chance to communicate with the college, think of it this way. You get your elbows in there and you make opportunity, okay? You can be an enigma if you so choose. And I bet you 95% of the kids in America are going to be very happy to say, "Okay, I don't have to do it anymore. It's all optional." And there'll be a small little group of people who make opportunities and become real in a virtual world. And that's my challenge to you. How do you become a real human being in a world that has turned virtual and cardboard and tasteless and smellless, right? The COVID world. But you're a real person. Communicate that. Okay, Janice, I think that's what I got for that one.
Wonderful. That's great information for everybody to take. So basically any chance you have to reach out in addition to having that interview is a great opportunity. That's basically what you're saying. That's wonderful. So along those same lines, so once you have that, or you're in an interview, or you're planning for an interview, or you have that opportunity to reach out, how is it that a student should best demonstrate how they are that match? Well, I guess we're kind of getting into the meat and potatoes part of it. How do they show that match? How do they demonstrate that?
Okay, so we're getting to the content part, right? Back to what I told you guys, my kids back at Andover used to say to me, "Hey, Mark, I don't know what the questions are, so how can I prepare?" And what I said before was, no, that's not important. What's important is your answers. So what you need to do is you need to make and I'm going to, by the way, I'm going to send you all an article called "Developing Your Personal Story." And it's an article I wrote a while ago, but it helps you go through this very process. As Janice said, how do we know how to articulate that match? Okay. And the personal story is really, that's my name for what happens in the beginning of nearly every formal interview, just as Janice said to me today, right? Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? That's what happens at the beginning of each of them, in one way or another. They might say, "Why do you want to go to our college?" Well, my answer to that is, you know what? That's really the same question. It's really, "Okay, kid, here you go. Tell me what you got. Why should we take you?" That's what they're really thinking. Okay? So you need to know the answer to that question. And you need to know it in terms of a general statement, "Who am I?" And you need to know it in terms of a specific statement. Why am I right for Bryn Mawr, in the case of the girl I was just talking about? So you start with who am I? And you go through the various achievements in your life. Now look, don't worry about it. You don't have to have cured cancer or get a gold medal from the Olympics. No. I like to say to kids, hey, can you tie your shoes? And of course, everybody goes, yeah, Mark, yeah, everybody can. So what? And I say, yeah, but wait a minute. Let's not tell it that way. That's pretty tedious. I can tie my shoes. Everybody can. How about this? The day I learned to tie my shoes was the day my mother no longer needed to get me dressed. That was the day I started being independent in my life, making my own decisions. What am I going to wear today? Who am I going to see? What am I going to do? How do I feel? That's the day I took control of my life. All right. Now that's a much better way to tell the same story, right? And I know you guys all have more significant achievements than tying your shoes. What are the things that you have done? And who have you become as a result of it? So when I send you the article on developing the personal story, I will also send you a worksheet, which is just basically a series of little levers into your memory to help you remember your achievements. And then we can start adding them up and saying which ones demonstrate certain skills that make you you. You'll see the story of a boy in there who says, well, I can tell you about me in one word. I'm a hurdler. Now, you know, I run the 300 intermediate hurdles, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that in my life, there have been several hurdles. And every time I develop a technique, you don't just jump over the hurdles. There's a very specific technique to get your legs over them and throw them back on the track and propel yourself forward to the next hurdle. I've also had ADD. And I had to develop a technique to accomplish that because the drugs didn't work for me, but goal setting did. So I started putting little yellow sticky notes on my mirror every night of what I need to do. And if I accomplished them, I took them down. If I didn't, I moved them over to the next day. And that technique helped me accomplish goal setting, helped me accomplish focus. Also, Spanish vocabulary. I couldn't memorize Spanish vocabulary to save my neck, right? Focus, vocabulary memorization. But my other thing I really like is music. And I can memorize anything that's got a melody. The words just are there. So I found a website. You put the Spanish vocabulary words into the website and it pops out a song that you can sing in Spanish with those words. And that's how I passed Spanish. So if I come to your college, I know there's going to be obstacles that I'm going to have to get over. And what you can count on is that I will develop a technique to get over those hurdles and get to the finish line at or ahead of the people around me. That's why I say I'm a hurdler. Now, what else you want to know about me? Okay, so that's just a quick little version of it. What's the quick little version of you? What is it that will make you stand out in the mind of an interviewer? Now, will you get a chance to do that in a formal interview? Yeah, most likely. In an informal interview, there might be a chance they might just say, well, why don't you just fill me in about your background? Boom, off you go. They might say, why do you want to go to our school? And you can say, well, look, I know you've got a track team. I know you've got an opportunity that fits right in with my life. But also, I know there's going to be some situations there that my ability to develop a technique to get over the hurdles that I'm going to run into in college, that fits right with who I am. Would you like to hear about that? And they always say yes. And then you tell your story. So I think that this is the critical thing, is to understand who you are. When you talk to a college, you better know who they are. Don't treat them as all generic colleges want to hear the same thing, right? Figure out what it is at that school. Get on that website and check it out. And be able to say, look, here's me, here's you, and here's where we match. And if you have difficulty with that, read this article, look at my worksheet, try to line that stuff up. And of course, Janice was there to help. I'm there to help for any of you who are running into these specific questions. But do your homework and present yourself, and you will stand out. I think that's the sort of the start of it. We could get into the breakdown of the interview, but that might be coming up still, yeah. Right?
Just before that, maybe you can talk a little bit, and it kind of goes along with what you're saying, but maybe you can talk just a little bit about how do you, sort of, online interviews are different a little bit than an in-person interview.
Oh, yeah.
How do you address that difference so that kids feel comfortable and authentic when they're doing an interview online versus doing it in person? Is there a way to do it authentically and comfortably?
Well, okay. One of the keys to an online interview is exactly the same as the key to a in-person interview. And that is that you got to know your content. You got to know what it is that you want to communicate. You can't just walk in there and say, okay, hit me. I'll do the best I can, because you will not be your most brilliant self in the moment when you get there. We know this, right? You know this. You know, if you really get an opportunity, you're going to be a little nervous, right? If you aren't, you probably ought to start over. It is a common thread. And when we are nervous or a little bit defensive, particularly when we think that we're open for judgment, right? That's not when we get our most brilliant self. Usually in that case, what happens is you're watching a football game several hours later, right? And during the huddle or the advertisement, you start thinking about the question that they asked you. And that's when you go, oh, what I should have said. And you get brilliant after the fact. So no, before an online interview or an in-person interview, you want to get brilliant before you go. You want to inventory the information that you need to communicate. And you want to make darn sure that you have that. Now, back to Janice's question, online. There is an advantage. And the advantage is that in a real life personal interview, you probably should not have a cheat sheet. Now, there's the stuff I want to say, like right there on your table. And they ask you a question, you go, oh, just a minute. Let's see. You can't really do that. But in an online interview, you can, right? You can have the stories inventory that you want to tell that demonstrate your leadership, your work ethic, your planning and organization, your motivation for learning, all that stuff the college is going to judge you on. Well, what story best demonstrates that? And then you take a little card and you stick it right there on the corner of your computer with your information. And when they ask you the questions, you go, oh, well, let's see. Oh, I know. And you tell them that story, right? You have your stuff ready to go. So that's really important. Now, so content, that's number one. Know your content before an online interview. Number two, don't be boring. Now, you guys all know, you've all been steeped in the online world lately. And you have all had that teacher that I talked about earlier. Okay, kids, today we're going to have the American Revolution. We're going to start with don't be that person. Top of head, top of frame, right? Even if it cuts off a little of my baldness, that's okay. Get your hands involved. Be alive, be energetic, move in the picture, okay? Have light on your face. I can't tell you how many kids I have talked to where there's bright windows behind you, black face, dark. I'm like some kind of a hooded character, Don't be that. Check it out. Like right now, all the five of you who I can see, you look fine, okay? Chip, if you were going to be in an interview right now, you've got light on your chin. You're going to, this doesn't matter for today, but you're a great demonstration. I appreciate it. Thank you. And thanks for having your camera on. Let's see who you are. And let's see your hands, right? All your public speaking teachers will tell you if you have no gestures, the audience often assumes you have no life. And you all of a sudden become this person. And nobody wants, right? If you are memorable, you are more successful. Okay? Particularly with interviews, because the decisions are getting made months after the interviews. Okay? So be memorable. Have good content and express it in a way that is articulate and exciting. I can tell you about me in one word. I'm a hurdler. Now, he could have said, I work really hard at kind of getting over the obstacles in my life. Boring, right? So find a way to tell your story that has a little zing to it. Okay? So also acting for the camera, a little green dot right up here. I keep reminding myself to look up there, right? If I'm looking down here at me or at you, what do you see? You, right? It's not the same. Now you don't want to do the whole interview like they think you're nuts, but make sure that you from time to time glance up at the little green dot, okay? And make sure your voice has modulation. You do not speak the entire time just like this, right? You want to have some energy that stays alive. So those are my big tips for online interviews. Know your content, most important, and practice it. Practice being able to communicate that content. Practice being able to steer a stupid question like, what's your favorite color? Right? You might get those. What'd you have for breakfast today? That's what they ask when you seem too prepared. Right? Well, if they ask, what's your favorite color? You say, well, look, my favorite color, what story can I tell? Oh, my leadership story? My favorite color is red because the basketball team, we wear red jerseys. And when they elected me captain of the basketball team and I walk out on that court and I'm representing my school in my red jersey, I've never been so proud in my entire life. And you just told your leadership story, even though they gave you a stupid question. Okay? The questions are not important. It's the answers that you squeeze in. Okay, so that's online interviews.
Okay. So from there, we could probably segue into what you were talking about before, which is the question, you know, my question about format. Do the schools have a format?
Oh, yeah.
And if so, what is that usually? I know obviously they vary from school to a certain extent, but is there a way of planning for a certain format, or how do you do that? You know,
Okay.
are there tips that students should follow?
Absolutely. Okay. So this is the interesting thing. I think I told you guys at the beginning that when I was teaching my students at Andover how to prepare themselves for an interview, I always begin by explaining the 5 parts of an interview. Now I would tell the other interviewers at Andover that I was doing that, and they go, "Oh, well, no, I don't do that." And I'd say, "What do you mean?" They say, "Well, I don't have any standard format. I just go in there and talk to the kids. I do my own thing." And I'd say, "Yeah, I know. Let me tell you my 5 parts." And then I go through my 5 parts, and nearly everyone says to me thereafter, "Oh, actually, that is exactly what I do. I just never saw it that way." So here we go. When I work with the kids on interviewing, this is how I start. We go through the 5 parts of an interview. They almost all begin the same way. It's what I call chit chat, right? And an online interview, it's going to be, hey, can you hear me? Can you see me? You know, we're going to click this or that. We got to turn on the microphone. There's a little bit of silly stuff about internet, right? And then they might say something like, okay, now let's see. What city are you in? And what time is it there? And is it a nice day? If it's an in-person interview, it usually includes a handshake and there's a meet the parents and there's a this and then they say, oh, did you bring an umbrella? It's too bad it's raining on campus. None of this is important, okay? It's chit chat. It is designed to just loosen you up, to get over that initial angst of an interview. The most important thing to know about the chit chat part, what do you do? What's the strategy? Smile. Right? We want to see the pearly whites. We want to see some eye contact. We want to know that you're alive. You should be positive, upbeat, and friendly. Now, you don't have to lie. If you had a terrible day, if you drove to the admissions office and you had a flat tire on the way, and they say, how's your day going? You could say, hey, I had a flat tire, but I'm here. And we're going to make it. And, you know, it's pretty exciting. Here we are. You flew and they lost your luggage. Hey, maybe I get a new suit. Put a positive spin, but be yourself, all right? Now, the most important thing to know about chit chat is when it's over. And often after a little bit of this time where you're just kind of chatting with the interviewer, they go, okay, tell you what, why don't we get started, Janice, by you just telling me a little bit about yourself. It just changed, didn't it? Right? Or they might say, well, by the way, why do you want to come to Harvard? We're not in chit chat anymore, are we? Okay. What you're looking for, students, the change from the chit chat is what I call the open-ended question. It's a question that you are allowed to direct wherever you want. If they say, what time is it where you live? That is not an open-ended question, right? But when they say, hey, tell me about your days at high school, that's open-ended. And by the way, those are the three most often asked. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to go to our school? And tell me a little bit about your high school experience. Okay? Or what do you really like about your high school? Right? Those are all open-ended questions. Now, it's not the real question in the interviewer's head. Remember, here's the big secret. They're not going to come right out and say, okay, Chip, we're going to get about 6,000 smart kids who apply to our school this year. Why the heck should we pick you? They're not going to say that because it would totally freak you out, right? They just went through this whole process of trying to make you relax and take it easy. Here we go. So now they're going to serve it up easy, like a softball over the plate. Now, for 20 years when I was doing interviews, I watched them respond like this. Where do you want me to start? My name is Mark Efinger, and I was actually born in Japan, and my family moved to America when I was about 3 months old, and then I went to the following schools, and I'm 17 years old, and I really want... Why restate your resume? It's already there. I've got all that information on the form that you filled out. It's on your application. Tell me what you're made of, right? So that boy who says, I can tell you about me in one word. I'm a hurdler. And let me tell you what that means. There are hurdles in my life. Then here's how I have developed a technique to get over. That's what you're going to do. You're going to deliver your personal story. Now, you got to steer it to the question, right? But remember the real question. Why should we pick you? Here's me. Here's you. Here's where we match. Okay? So that's part 2 of the interview. The open-ended question, your personal story. Part 3. This is the one that I call questions. Now, I'm sorry, it could be questions that they ask you a bunch of questions. It might be sometimes the interviewer just has this nice little conversation with you. There are no real questions. We're just talking about stuff in general. But the game is the same. The middle portion of the interview is what I call targets and arrows. The targets are the criteria that the school is told the interviewers, you got to evaluate the kid on these criteria. And every school has a list of criteria. They don't want each interviewer going in there, doing their own thing and, you know, saying, oh, you got the football coach and he's interviewing, looking for tight ends, right? And he's got some little tiny kid who's got no interest in football. They don't want that. They want to know the same thing. Is he a hard worker? What's his motivation for learning? What's his planning and organization, decision-making, judgment? You know the list. It's right on the back of the college recommendation form, okay? So in the teacher recommendation form, there's a list of criteria. They ask the teachers, best 1%, top 5%, middle of the road, awful, run like hell. This kid's a disaster. They have these little check boxes. Well, those are the criteria that they're interested in. What you need, those are targets. And for every target, what you want is an arrow that hits that target dead center. So what do? You go in there and say, by the way, that hardworking thing, work ethic, just put me down for a 5. No, of course not. They're never going to buy that. You tell them a story. You tell them about the day that you got up early and did extra work or did an extra run or went to practice or stayed in the library until after closing and then your mother had to shut you down because you had the flashlight under the bed. You tell them that story. And they go, whoa, that's a really hardworking kid. 5. So for every target, you want your arrow, your story from your life that authentically demonstrates bullseye. Okay? And you have those spruced up and ready to go in your quiver when you walk into the interview. And you just look for the chance to get them out of the quiver and stick them in the targets. That's the middle part. Now comes part 4, right? Okay, this has been great. I've learned an awful lot about you. So now, I imagine you probably have some questions for me, right? Every single interview, unless they forget or run out of time. They're supposed to. They're all trained to do that. What questions do you have for me? And you know what the number one answer I used to get when I would ask that? Do you have any questions for me? Kids would say, no, you answered them already. Or I asked the tour guide, or I already saw everything I wanted to know on your website. Are you kidding? No, have questions. Have them written down, right? Stuck right there on the side of your computer. Or even better, what you say is, yeah, I've got questions. I've been on your website. I'm really interested in your college. Is it all right if I look? And show the paper. Demonstrate that you do your homework. A kid who will not do his homework for an interview sure as heck isn't going to do it for third-year physics. Okay? Demonstrate that you have been online and ask questions that also demonstrate this. The stuff you're interested in. Are you interested in physics? Go to the physics department. See what the courses are. If there is a question that you can find the answer to on the internet, do not ask it. If you can't find the answer, write that question down. When a kid says, oh, by the way, how many students go to your college? All they have proven is that they are too lazy or too stupid to understand that there is such a thing as the internet. Okay, so make sure that your question is not already easily answered. Do your homework, know the school the best you can, but find things you cannot learn online and ask those. That's part 4. Here comes part 5. Okay, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much. And the kids say, oh, thank you, and they hang up. All right, at least you said thank you, but wait a minute. You can upgrade this final part. I call part 5 the closing. In the closing, you definitely want to say, thank you for the time that you have given me today. Now think of these poor admissions officers, particularly this year. They're doing all of these Zoom calls with these people who are boring and, virtual people. And then you say to them, listen, I want you to know how much I appreciate the time that you've spent actually talking to me today. I feel so much better to be in this crazy world that we live in and to actually have the time to spend with someone today. Thanks. Genuine and empathetic to the interviewer. Okay, that's absolutely every time. Now, if you can, take it a step further. Remember I said that interviews are like sales calls? Yeah, you're the salesman. You're also the product being sold. So every good salesman, when I was a sales manager with Pfizer, I had to tell my sales reps all the time, hey, you got to ask the closing question. You can't just sit there and tell them how many Bunsen burners were in the studies and how many people and what the percent. You can't just give them features. You got to tell them why it works. And then you got to say, hey, will you do it? Will you prescribe the drug? We like to say that the best salesperson in the world is a Girl Scout. Because she never tells you how many chocolate chips are in the cookie. She just says, hey, mister, you want to buy some cookies? Right? Or she goes with the alternate close, right? Here we go, sales talk, right? You want the chocolate chips or the mints? It's the closing question. You want the red car or the blue car? Okay, now you cannot say, here's the big closing question in a college interview, right? Hey, am I going to get into your school? You can't do that. The interviewer does not have the authority to say yes or no. They have one authority, to write a great interview report. That's what you're there for. Not to get in, but to get a good report put into your file. Now, if you've got somebody who's been super enthusiastic and going, hey, yeah, this would be great, we'd love to have you. Okay, you can be aggressive. And here would be a good aggressive question. Oh, this has been wonderful. I'm so glad to have had this opportunity to learn with you. And you gave me so much time today. Thank you so much. By the way, have I given you all the information you need to write a good positive report about me to the admissions committee? Now look, don't say that if it's too aggressive. If the interviewer is going to come back, and you have to judge this from what happened in the call, right? But if the interviewer is going to come back and say, oh, wait a minute, now you have to understand, it's very competitive here at Harvard. And I meet kids all the time that I think are great, but you cannot, that's not the mindset you want him in when he sits down to write your interview report. With that guy, what you might have been better off to say is, hey, I was really excited about your school before, and you've been so kind to give me so much of your time today. I just hope you're equally excited about me. What's he going to say? Oh, yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing your application. Great. So in the closing, I'm gonna say this slowly, right? Your job is to elicit the most positive response that this interview has earned. I'll say that again. Elicit the most positive response from the interviewer that this interview has earned. And that is your closing question. Exactly what it will be, I can't tell you. If we practiced interviewing a bunch, which is what I do with my kids, I always have them ask a closing question, and I'm a different interviewer every time I go over it with them. So they have to make a judgment call and go for something positive. Now look, if you don't do that, it's not the end of the world, but it is an opportunity to leave the interviewer with a positive feel and to get them to actively say something positive. So right after you leave and they pull out that old report form, they will write something positive. Okay? So that's the 5 parts. Real quickly, I'll review. Chit chat, friendly, upbeat, positive strategy. Part 2, open-ended question. You tell them your personal story. Here's me, here's you, here's why we match. Part 3, this is the middle part. This is where you want to use whatever happens, conversation questions, to get as many of your arrows out of the quiver and into the targets. You gotta know what the stories are that demonstrate you're the kid they're looking for, okay? Part 4, questions for me, good written questions. You got them right there written down. And then finally, the closing. Thank you for your time and in any way to create a positive response. So that is the format. And when I would tell interviewers, they all say, no, I don't do that. Then I tell them and they go, oh yeah, actually that's exactly what I do. And think about it. They don't count the chit chat, even though it matters. They don't count the open-ended question, because most kids just give them a resume, right? I'm 17 years old. I go to such a high school. I live in such and such a town, and my favorite food is roast beef. Whatever stupid thing right? And so they don't count that. The only thing they're really counting is that middle portion, and they do go all over the map. But you don't care, because you've got the information inventory, and you're just going to look for the chance to tell it. And then they all say, do you have any questions for us? And they don't count that because they figure their job's over. And of course they don't count the thank you at the end, because they're just trying to hang up. So yes, they all do it the way I just told you. And knowing that gives you a structure to communicate what you came to communicate. You now know the rules of the game and how to go about doing it. Now it's up to you. Inventory your stuff, okay? Inventory your stories and practice them. Okay, that's the format, Janice.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question to that along the same lines. So in terms of showing your personality a little bit when you're doing these interviews, it is okay to sort of, if that's part of who you are, to inject a little bit of humor into, is that okay? If it's just part of your nature, is that something that you think is appropriate to do in an interview?
Essential to do. think of it this way. Absolutely, always be authentic. Be who you are, right? And that's sometimes a little tricky when, if you look up on, online, what are the interview tips? It's going to say dress for success, be yourself, be confident. Well, wait a minute. Be yourself. There's all kinds of different selves, right?
Right.
There's the one your mother brags about and the one your mother scolds and sends to your room. You're a complicated person. So you want to not only be yourself, but you want to be your best self. And I think nearly every one of you has a sense of humor, right? And if you are an interviewer and you got to listen to one interview after another all day long, and someone makes you smile, you're going to remember them. And if someone tortures you with another boring interview, I mean, think of it, doing 5 of these a day, every day for 15 years, someone makes you smile or laugh, someone's real, authentic, live, absolutely. If there's a chance for you to, show the pearly whites, as I said, hey, absolutely, you should be doing that. But if there's a joke that you want to tell, provided it isn't completely inappropriate, yeah. And you can laugh a little, just as I just did. Like, yes, let it go. Okay?
Sounds good.
Don't be uptight. Nobody wants that person.
That sounds great. There's a lot of good information in there. Thank you. Okay. So my next question has to do with the pre-recorded video, so to speak, video interviews or responses.
Oh,
So if you could address that a little bit, how they're different and how students might prepare for that, that would be great.
yeah. Okay. So these are definitely a growing phenomenon, right? About, I don't know, it was about 5, 6 years ago, they started this thing called Zeme. And a lot of schools would have kids sort of do a pre-recorded video. Here's who I am, as my little blah, 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 blah. And most of them were pretty horrendous and were full of false assumptions and a lot of ridiculous bragging. So a lot of schools have backed away from the Zeme one. There might still be some out there. If you get one of those, just tell your personal story. We've already worked it out. Here's who I am, here's who you are, here's where we match, right? Authentic. Now, the other kind that are really growing is the one where you have to dial in at a certain time or whatever, or the computer has a random generated question thing, and they hit you with a question, and they give you 15 seconds to think about it, and then you got to respond right there. And it's a live thing, and you got 2 minutes to tell us about your thoughts on climate change. Okay. If it's a real specific thing like that, well, you just got to go after it. Or a case study, particularly at the graduate school level. Sometimes they offer these case study things. All right, you've got to, and those you just got to respond to them, and you do the best you can. But if there is one that is a little bit more generalized with the question, you want to prepare for these the same way you do for the interview. The inventory of your arrows, your stories that demonstrate work ethic, planning and organization, that whole same list that we talked about. What are the hot buttons for this college, right? There are some schools that are totally into leadership. There are some schools, and you go on their website and you look through it, and it's all about social justice. So if that's the case, what's your best social justice story? What have you done that has to do with that? So once you know what those stories are, your arrow stories, if you get one of those interview questions that pop up where you have to just talk for 2 minutes on something, if there is any way you can steer the conversation to the stories that you want to tell, perfect. Do it. Use the opportunity to squeeze in the information that you know you need to communicate. Okay? I think that's the best way to deal with those in the moment recorded interviews.
Great. Thank you. That's great. There was a lot of good information in there. And we're getting close to being out of time. So I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions. And if you do, I think the best would be to just go ahead and unmute yourselves and go ahead and ask your questions. Avery, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being here. We got any questions, guys?
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining
Oh,
us.
you're more than welcome. And listen, if Janice, would it be okay for me to give my email address if any kid wants to send me, or you adults who are here as well?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to put it in the chat window right now, okay?
Yeah. And we will also be recording this, so if anybody wants to look at it again, to get some more of that information, we will be sending you the link as soon as that's available. And we will be also, Mark will be sending, you'll also be sending the report, correct, Mark?
That's right. I'm going to send you an article called Developing Your Personal Story. That whole story, the kid who says I'm a hurdler, it's in that thing. I'll also send you a worksheet, which is essentially, tell me about your academic achievements, tell me about your sports achievements, and it kind of goes through. But I ask a bunch of little questions to try to help, as I said, little levers to help pop, oh, I didn't do that, but I did this. And that's great. Then we can start using those to develop both your personal story and your targets and arrows stories, okay? So those are the two big tools that I use to help kids get ready to develop your content. So I'm going to send you those just as a thank you for coming to the webinar today, okay?
Great. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Mark for all the wonderful information today. I appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Take
Anybody,
care.
one last shot? Question, anybody? Josh? Something, I think I see something going on Josh's face. We got a question?
Chat? Oh, Travis. Travis, thank you. Appreciate you attending today. Okay. Thank you, everybody.